that. Welcome to the Tail Researchers and Haiti Researchers series. We're in sunny May. It's a bit cold today in the UK. We'll talk about the weather in Canada in a minute because we are in Canada virtually today with the one and only Dave Cormier. Welcome. We introduced Dave. We'll introduce Dave properly in a minute. So my name is Pierre. I am a PhD candidate with the Educational Research Department at Lancaster University, and I'm also the Innovation and Scholarship Manager at Queen Mary University of London. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm John Brindle, also a student on the PhD in e-research and TEL at Lancaster, cohort 14, the best cohort, obviously. And I'm researching inclusive practice, and I am learning design manager at Edge Hill University in the northwest of England.
It is my absolute honour to introduce Dave Cormier, who is someone I have been admiring for a long time from afar, from the UK to Canada. I've always thought this guy is really cool. His work is really awesome, particularly what he stands for, the kind of openness in sharing with the community, etc., which we'll have a chat about it later. So Dave currently is a learning specialist in the Office of Open Learning at the University of Windsor in Canada. They said Dave has been an educator, researcher, and an author in the field of education for many years. My understanding is that his special interests range from sort of curriculum design, digital education, and open educational resources, etc., and always with a focus of what works for the community, what works for our students. And Dave has recently launched a new book called Learning in a Time of Abundance. The community is the curriculum, which I'm sure we will get a chance to discuss that. So the format today is a little bit different. It is a conversation instead of the kind of presentation followed by Q&A. So John and I are going to ask Dave some questions, but feel free to chip in any time you have a question to ask Dave, because we know there are a lot of fans of Dave's work in the audience today. So welcome to the series, Dave. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is really exciting. A little intimidating. There's a lot of smart people in the room, but it's an awful lot easier to do this as a presentation, because then everybody just assumes I know what I'm talking about and nobody like cross-references anything. So this will be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. So the first question I have is, and we're going to go all the way back to the very beginning. Why did the young Dave want to go into higher education?
A hilarious question with an answer you will probably not expect. So young Dave was in a bar in South Korea, and I was talking to an ex-US Army veteran, or an ex-US Army, an Army veteran, who was working at a local university and was only teaching 12 hours a week and 8 months a year. And I thought, wow, that's what I want. Look at all the vacation I'd have. That's how I ended up going into higher education. And that first year, I taught footwear engineering majors, because Korean universities are tiered, and like based on what graduation, how you graduate, what score you get placed in a university and in a program, or at least you can't go up from there. You can go down in the official importance rankings. And I was on the bottom. And I had 270 writing students that first year. And I'd never taught in a university before. I had an undergraduate degree and no clue what I was doing. And so I also had organizational skills of, let's say, a ferret. So like there's just little bits of scraps of paper around my office. And somebody went, you should probably use a computer. And I was like, I don't like computers. And so somebody got me into a discussion forum and taught me how to set that up for my students. And then at that moment where my students started interacting, and I looked at it and I was like, and I also started getting them to work online at the same time. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I've been kind of scratching at that same thing ever since. So totally, because I was the biggest slacker on the planet, and it was one prep, 12 hours a week, beautiful gig. But it started that sort of curiosity, that question that I've been stuck with ever since.
In our very initial conversation, you said to me that, you're not a traditional researcher, you are a storyteller, and you use it as a kind of almost like a research methodology. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Because it's like really fascinating.
So have you ever read Laurel Richardson? She's one of my favorite researchers. She is maybe the epitome of the kind of thing I'm talking about in terms of research as story. She writes these very powerful pieces, and they're some of the best learning places I've ever gone to in terms of understanding the context of the education system. That's sort of what I aspire to, is being able to write about the things that I'm looking at in a way that not only less about trying to prove something and more about trying to elucidate a context. Having spent years working inside of community stuff, there's no way to really talk about it effectively. There's so many intersectional sort of pieces that are happening all the time that you're always only looking at a small part of the puzzle. And I think story works better for me, at least, both on a reading and on a writing, from a learning, from a receiving and from a giving perspective. Story works way better to sort of give people a context, like a snapshot, a window into that, than trying to break that into atomic pieces that I can count. And for me, the things that I'm interested in looking at always break into two categories, and pardon the dualist, but those two categories are things we can count, counting and non-counting nouns. And for me, learning is a non-counting noun. And so that's the sort of primary place that I start from. And most of the stuff I talk about are about non-counting nouns. Not that I haven't been in places where it isn't, because I certainly have. Like, I've done work. When I worked for the government, I did work on attendance, which is an awesome counting noun and something we should certainly count, because you can count how many people are in a room effectively. Not always why they're not in the room, but at least have they shown into the room, right? So for me, story is way more effective from my perspective at talking about non-counting nouns. Have you guys, I mean, the term wicked problems runs out in common language, but that original article by Riddle and Weber is one of my sort of guideposts, right? It's this idea that somehow people who are very serious about what is meant to be a really practical thing at some point just kind of go, we've done this a really long time, and there are certainly ways we can approach those questions, and we can certainly work on pieces of the puzzle. I mean, it fits in the same way with sort of research on complexity. You look at like Morin and the way he talks about complexity. Community to me falls into that category. So the idea of community as curriculum is one of those things I've tried very hard not to define, because it tends to mean different things for different people, and I'm totally okay with that. I'm happy with whatever it does for whomever. But the way that I look at it, at least today, and I reserve the right to change my mind for tomorrow, is that coming to know in a field is as much about understanding how that field interacts with itself as it is acquiring a bunch of facts or stories or whatever. And it's something that's really hard to talk about. But right now I'm teaching in the Faculty of Education here at the University of Windsor, and I'm teaching Bachelor of Education students. And I'm trying to talk to them about what it means to be a teacher, like to be someone who is a member of that group, right? And sort of trying to give them a window into what the curriculum is. Like, what does it mean to be part of that group, and then what does that mean you need to learn? So, I had one student who's like, well, I don't like talking to adults, but that's why I want to teach kids. And I'm like, you're misunderstanding the whole context of being a teacher. Being a teacher is part of a community. And again, I'm using the word community two ways here, but it's about being part of that group. You can't just hive yourself off from the rest of a school and teach the kids in front of you. That's not how a school works. That's not what being a teacher is. Being part of that community is also about learning from your colleagues. It's also about helping them learn. It's also about all these other things. And so for me, when we start talking about researching these things, it is always about keeping yourself open to all of those contextual pieces, to those liminal spaces, to those other places, so that what we don't end up doing is hive off a part of that conversation about what it means to be a teacher or how to train teachers effectively, and then hive something off from that whole, or from that mess, maybe is a better word than whole, and then try to research that in a small box, and then somehow get that research popularized, and then suddenly somebody in a government somewhere goes, this is what we're going to do. And then, because that's the way the research cycle goes, right? So for me, whenever I'm looking to research something, I'm looking to make some kind of, I'm looking to engage in some kind of conversation. Now, if I don't find what I'm looking for, that's the way research goes, but I'm looking to push something in some direction. I'm interested in exploring some kind of thing, but I'm also conscious of the way that it could impact on the other end. And so for me, when you look at knowing as a community that someone becomes a part of, then you're always sensitive to how each part of what you research in that can impact the whole, and how it can be taken out of context when it gets used politically, or how it can become a standpoint that someone stands on and shouts other people down from. Was that too weird an answer? I don't know. I'm sort of speaking from the inside of my head here.
No, it's really cool, and so I'm going to follow that up, if that's okay, because you kind of alluded to something about that relationship between research, policy, and practice.
Mm-hmm.
You take, the idea that if you do some research and a government might pick it up and say we're doing that, then just to kind of obviously quote yourself back at yourself, which is just a bit weird, but in this context. But in terms of that, how do you see that relationship? When you're researching, are you thinking about the policy, or are you thinking about what you want to research, or is it a mixture of things?
So I guess maybe a little bit of context there. I don't presume that people know anything about where I come from. I'm a bit of an educational vagabond. So I have worked in student recruitment. I spent a lot of time doing student retention, like talking about how students can succeed inside of universities. I taught in kindergarten. I taught in footwear engineering. I worked for the government for a while doing ed tech, sort of revamping the way a province set up its educational. So I've been in all kinds of different spaces, worked in the communications department in a university. I'm now a learning specialist. And so for me, the ways in which the system intersects is always on the top of my mind, because I've been in a lot of different places and seen a lot of ways in which, high school teachers say that they can't teach in an engaged way because that's not what's going to happen to them in university. The way that governments say, well, we can't do this thing that you say we're going to do because we're not going to get elected. And so when we're talking about change, which is, what I'm interested in. So for me, all of my educational work is about helping people be the best citizens they can. So fundamentally, that's my goal, whatever that means. But that's always the thing that I'm striving towards. And the system itself is incredibly resilient. And I don't mean that in a nice way. It is the rubber band on two posts, right? You can pull the rubber band and pull the rubber band, but as soon as you let it go, it goes back, and it goes back to its original place. So anytime you're trying to affect change in the way in which we think of education in a way that helps students become better citizens, we're always in a conversation about governments and curriculum departments and all the rest of the stuff, which is why for me, write a book, because I've been in ministers' offices where somebody's book is on the table and they're like, I just read this book. And you're like, you read 2 pages of that book. And that what they did was they read the summary of that book, and it gave them an excuse to do something that they can say that makes it cool to say it. And then they say it out loud, and then suddenly a whole bunch of hardworking bureaucrats are meant to try to make changes inside of the education system. So for me, all of these things are always on the top of my head whenever I'm working. And at the same time that I'm always trying to think about the values that I actually have while I'm working. So those are always sort of, so one of them is the context and the other one is the sort of value system I'm trying to carry with me at the same time. I fail at that lots, but that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, thanks for that. That's interesting. It's interesting to hear about that wider context as well, because I think it's very easy, isn't it, sometimes to just kind of think about, well, I do this particular job in this particular place, and not think about that wider context and where those various moving parts kind of fit in. Yeah. No, thanks for that. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question, kind of follow-up question. So you just said, your experiences, what you've kind of, the system you've navigated, etc., are the reason why you decided to write a book or books. So what do you see the kind of the act of writing a book and publishing a book and having a permanent record of your thought? What do you think that what role do you think that kind of act plays in the community?
Weird. It's weird. I've written, I was looking yesterday, 372 blog posts. They average about 1,000 words a piece. So that's, way more than is published in that book. And over, the first one I think is from 2005. So like some of those, when I look back at them, was like, and some of them I've debated editing or whatever else, but I leave them all up there. And again, I walk around embodied in a lot of privilege, so I don't get attacked for a lot of the stuff I've done in ways that other people do. So just, I understand that. But having it printed, I had a 75-year-old woman come up to me last week who'd read the book here locally and was like, I just read your book. And there was like little sticky notes like this, and she had little pen marks inside. And she's like, this reminds me of when I came over from Greece. And she went on with this beautiful story that I don't know how she found this in the book, but it really struck her. And I ended up having this amazing 20-minute conversation with this very intelligent older woman who doesn't have the same education or background or any of the things that I do, but was really passionate to tell me the story. That difference in who has been talking to me about the stuff that I'm interested in has been by far the best part of this. And it's kind of was one of the secret hopes that I had, that I would end up in conversations, and not that you people aren't lovely, but I've spent 20 years working with people who already kind of know what I'm talking about. And it's been great to hear all these other voices who have already, like, I don't have to explain anything. They're telling me what I wrote, and I don't always remember. My brain's not very strong, but they're like, oh yeah, on page 72 you said the thing, and I was like,
did I?
Oh geez, I did say that. Barely. But engaging in that way with somebody who has already sort of read the perspective I'm coming from has been amazing. It's been really great. In terms of the permanence, that part's a little scary. Like, I'm accustomed to writing something and having it go away in like 2 weeks. And it's 3 months since the launch, and I'm still talking about it. That's never happened to me before.
You're going to be talking about it for a long time to come.
Yeah, no, it's not bad. Like, as you can tell already, for those of you who have not had the misfortune of interacting with me before, I'm not afraid to talk. As my mother said, she's still astonished that people pay me to talk. She has been thinking of paying me to stop for years, and doesn't think that would work either. But it's been really, that's been, the permanence is a little spooky, but the difference in the people I'm talking to is really fascinating. Because again, I tried to write a book people could read. Like, I really did try to write a book that a 75-year-old immigrant from Greece who is an intelligent woman, but not somebody with a huge education, could read and be interested in and have ideas about. So again,
that's
storytelling,
really,
right?
That's really inspiring, because a few of us have read your book before today, and I think we can all agree, certainly John and I can agree, that your writing, the way you write, it's not the kind of typical very dry academic, big words mean nothing kind of. You just really relatable. The way you write is like it's a storytelling anyone could understand to an extent what you've written. So I guess it's a little bit of a selfish question for me. Have you got any advice for anyone? Because I think publishing a academic book or academic related book is kind of like the holy grail for a lot of us who want to kind of aim toward someday, particularly through a proper publisher. Have you got any advice for us who, researcher perhaps in particular, who want to write their first book or who are about to write their first book?
I think I do. I think the first thing you need to think about is what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to, so I was talking to a colleague of mine who has wrote a book, I think it's 18 months ago. He needs to get to 95 sales before that hardcover book can go to softcover, so it's cheap enough for students to be able to afford. And he's sold 60 so far, and 40 of those he bought through a grant. If that's the kind of serious academic publishing you're looking for, that's probably the experience you're getting. That's the experience most people have. Is that a very small selection of very important people are going to read your book, but you're going to end up in that sort of realm where you're writing a journal article except longer. That's not everybody's experience. The other one is the sort of Martin Weller path, where you're writing the sort of middle place is that Martin Weller path, where you're writing to a community, but you're writing in a very sort of conversational style. And Martin's got a great tone to him that I'm assuming people know who I mean.
I found the link to his profile.
And so for me, I wanted to bring, I wrote about Deleuze and Guattari for years, and about the intersection of French postmodernism and the education system, and spent all of my time desperately trying to explain to people what a rhizome was and wasn't. And that was valuable time, but I spent more time trying to explain how it's not really a metaphor, and then realized at some point that it really didn't matter. And so that rhizomatic learning stuff is underneath that whole book, but I didn't bring it up once, because what I wanted to do was sort of translate the stuff that I've been doing for years in a way that people actually enjoy reading it, hopefully. So if you're looking for that, if you're looking to write something that people outside of your very specific part of the field can read, then you've got to be able to pitch a publisher that you're actually going to be able to sell the book. Because while academic publishing is definitely, there's a meritocracy in there, there's also a, how are you going to make our money back part of that conversation as well. So if you're making a pitch on that end of the scale, then you need to know how you're going to sell the book. So my book is peer reviewed through a reasonably well-known publisher, but I think I can't tell you why they made the decision to publish the book. I can tell you that it was a little bit easier because I knew how I wanted to go out and try to sell it. And I think it takes off some of the purity and some of the shine off the side of the conversation. But practically, I think that's the reality of the world that we live in. I mean, you can write the purely academic book, and there's definitely a space for those, and I'm not criticizing those. But it's about which one you want to do. If you want to write something that lots of people are going to read, you have to know how you're going to get the book to lots of people. To start,
I think that's what I'm going to do this afternoon. Trying to look for a. I'm joking. I'm far away from where you are. But one day, hopefully, we could get to near where you are. Because when I said I really admire your work, I do mean that, and I know you worked very hard over the years to get to where you are, to be relatable, etc.
Mine's about uncertainty, and obviously you talk quite a lot about uncertainty in the book. We are talking a bit about the book, and I think we'll possibly open it up after this as well to other people to ask questions as well, if that's okay. And so, like, this growing awareness of uncertainty that's happening. I mean, I know that you imply that kind of uncertainty isn't a new thing in there as well. In fact, I think you say that outright anyway. But what do we need to be doing differently as researchers, as educators, to help manage uncertainty and things like that? What would your advice be on kind of managing uncertainty?
So I think I just posted a link to the conference I'm pulling together in the summer. It's online. You're welcome to come. I think what I'm looking at, and I mean, I'll make some broad claims here. If you force me to cite them, I'll figure those out, send them to you later. One of the things we're looking at right now inside of my school is how prepared students are for hitting actual workforce experiences. Not in the sense that universities are places where we're training people for the workforce. That's not what I'm saying. These are professional programs. So kinesiology, social work, law, and education. So professional programs where we are literally training people for a job, not trying to claim that this is the entire university. In conversations with those groups, when we put them in a room together, one of them, let's say representative from law, will go, it's okay for you guys in social work, your students are ready whenever they go out to actually engage in a conversation with people, but we're finding that our students aren't. Social work will look back at law and went, well, actually, we thought you guys were the ones who had it together. And it sort of goes around like this in a circle. And what we find out is in those conversations is that the thing that students are hoping for when they hit the system is to be able to find the right answer to the question as they've been trained to do. And then they get put into those situations and they're not prepared for it. They're not prepared for confronting that uncertainty, for managing uncertainty, as you put it. So for me, and actually, Sarah Rose Kavanaugh just posted a piece 2 days ago about celebration of friction, which hits the same kind of conversation. I'll get that link in a second. I think as we, and I'll tell one more story, which is actually in the book and I've told a bunch of times, but I think it really hits. It was 3 years ago, a student of mine, about a week and a half, and he was working, an student employee of mine, stops me and goes, Dave, I have to apologize to you. And I'm like, super nice student, like I can't imagine what this is about. And he goes, you've been asking me for my opinion for the last week and a half, and I assumed you were lying because no adults ever asked me a question without already knowing what the right answer is. And that was the sort of linchpin to the work I'm doing now with uncertainty, is that we've gotten so objective focused, so learning efficiency focused, and also certainly here in Canada, so grade focused, that we've pushed more and more of this uncertainty in our lives. And actually, when you look at the way that kids are raised, they're going to art camp, not doing art. They're going to this play activity, not playing, right? And we've got more and more structure and less uncertainty for all kinds of good reasons, but less and less uncertainty in all these different spaces. And the argument, and also cajillions of abundance, like so many options that you need to choose between, and it's sort of almost an exhaustion of choice. I mean, imagine 3 people in a room trying to choose what to watch on Netflix. Like, so many choices that we're doing all the time that we didn't have to do before, that we have this sort of conjunction of way more choices in the run of the day because we have more options for things, and then also this sort of more rigid training approach. And I think it increasingly puts us in a position where the average student is less able to confront uncertainty, or at least that there's more uncertainty and they're exhausted when they get there, which is also, I think, I'm in no way blaming this generation. I think they're doing just fine. I think they're in the most difficult time to deal with any of this stuff that's ever happened. So for me, keeping that in mind all the time, realizing what situation these students really are in coming into the workforce, and trying to bring that sort of friction, as Sarah Rose would put it, or uncertainty into the learning process, even though it can mess up your nice numbers, even though it's a little bit harder to measure, is about helping those people prepare themselves for the world they're going to live in, prepare to be citizens. Again, going back to that, being a citizen is all about uncertainty. How do I heat my house? Like the things we do on a daily basis, they're full of those kinds of uncertain, wicked problems that we are all constantly trying to deal with.
Well, thanks for that, David. It's really interesting, that conversation about friction as well, because I'm just kind of doing my data analysis now and finding that friction is a word that keeps keeps coming up in conversation in regards to inclusive practice. So nice to hear your thoughts on that friction as well. And thanks for that. That's really, thanks for the answer. It was good.
There's Sarah Rose's post. I just put in there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, she's really smart. Actually a really great researcher to take a look at. She's what I can think of as the sort of the practically minded brain researcher who's actually thinking about people as humans, not as disconnected brains. I really like her work.
That's been bookmarked. Thank you.
Oh, good.
I was just wondering, with the uncertainty, is it also about kind of us as keep using the phrase citizens, kind of saying, you know, almost like sticking a middle finger up to the systems to say, do you know what, we we're not happy with the system, the policies, the government, the education system, whatever there might be, instead of being rebels.
I'll go further and add dominant researchers in education. That's where the finger is actually directed. I'll be perfectly honest with you. It's the people who are like, no, if you can't count that, it's not real. We don't care about it. And I'm like, I don't even care about what you guys research. Like, I really don't care whether or not what you do increases a student's grade by 2%. I could care less. I don't know why anybody listens to you. It has nothing to do with what these kids need to know. So that's really where it's focused. The rest of it, sure, but mostly the dominant researcher people. Unpopular opinion, maybe, but
well, you know, I think there's certainly a movement at the moment that I'm seeing. People are saying, you know, grades and percentage and whatever don't work. But then I guess the kind of, you know, I don't know what my opinion is, but how do we then, certainly from an institutional perspective, how do we then measure students' success? And I'm putting in a big quotation mark because, you know, that's totally subjective. Because, yeah, you got an opinion on that? How do we measure student success?
How do we measure student success? I'm not really super worried about it. I have to, because my university has a bunch of Senate regulations that I have to follow. So I've got a system I use. It's mostly about effort-based grading. For me, success is engaging in the process. That's what I look at as much as I can. As much as I can design my course for effort-based grading, that's what I do. Is measuring effort and accurate process? No. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay. I'd far rather be in an argument with a student going, you lazy little punk, rather than, oh, you come from a background where the idea of school is positioned in this sense, and this is a long way for you to come, but I'm going to give you a bad grade because of where you come from. Which is, so if I'm going to fail at one thing, I'm going to fail at the argument about whether or not somebody's working hard, not about the privilege someone doesn't have to understand the conversation we're in.
Yeah, I've personally been involved in a few casual conversations about, you know, does engagement equal attendance? Because it doesn't, but some people think it does.
I mean, it does a little. Like you do have to be there at some level.
Yeah.
There's something about showing up. I'm certainly willing to see a person who is not showing up but still engaging. I'm willing to extend to that, but I would say that you're more likely to be able to engage if you're actually there where the engagement is happening. I don't think that's too controversial. It's too much.
Would you like to?
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I think so. I say this to so again, I'm teaching right now. I'm teaching future K-12 teachers, which is it's a lovely place to be, because if you're looking to be insidious, every one of those people has a potential to spread your terrible ideas to thousands of others. So I really love it. And one of the arguments that I make is I'd rather a kid like math than no math, which it makes huge like upheaval in my classroom with my students. But I'm like, look, if I get a question wrong in a math question in grade 7, you can still work with that student to help them figure it out. They don't have to do another test to prove that they have. Like, if you can get them to understanding, that's still my job as a teacher. But my goal as a teacher is to leave you feeling happy about the idea of math, or at least not terrible about it. Because if you're getting your questions right, but you're left with a hatred of it, when you try to come back to it 5 years from now, you're just going to go, I don't do math. I hate math. And you're not preparing someone for the rest of their lives. You're trying to get them in your little atomic space to fit into the right box. You're trying to push them into that box rather than trying to teach them something about the magic of math or whatever that would mean. I'm not suggesting I love math. I'm just saying that that distinction is the one that I care about, right? So, and the response I always get there is people are like, well, you wouldn't want to train doctors like that. The number of times people have said that to me in the last 20 years. It's literally how we train doctors. So we do. So I managed a med school. I always feel weird when I start talking about my work history because every time I'm like, oh, I worked at that for a year. It makes me sound like a ridiculous person. But anyway, managed a med school for a year. And we do 2 years of faculty business. Basically, nobody pays attention to a medical student until their 3rd year in Canada when they go out into the hospital and sort of play around with the community of doctors and learn what it is to be a doctor. And then really, it's not until they graduate and then go back out for their residency that they actually learn how to be a doctor. They learn how to be a doctor by being around doctors and learning how doctors interact. There's some problems with that. Makes it really hard to make changes because everybody just takes on the practices of the previous generation. So not a perfect system, but it is about getting in there, understanding the process, getting a feel for how to interact with people, getting a sense for that process. I mean, it's not that the facts aren't important, it's just not the primary goal. Yeah, Lucy, that's how I look at it. If I can encourage care, and again, I'm teaching teachers, right? So it's easy to take up this position because at the end of the day, if they care for their students, it'll be way better. Those students will be way better off. And I don't mean just care in that sort of I show up and smile every day sense, but care is one of those things that it requires work too, like thinking about each one of those people. And we do a lot of work in the classroom about sort of internal narrative that you have as a teacher, where you're thinking about the people who are there and trying to get ahead of them, trying to get a sense for, like, if you can get in front of little Jimmy who's about to smash the computer on the floor because you can see it in his face, then little Jimmy never smashes that computer on the floor, never gets in trouble, and stays in your class. That's also an expression of care, right? That sort of broader sense. But I mean, how are you going to research care in the classroom? Nobody's going to give
Ken
you
Robinson is
$5 million in funding to research care in the classroom.
So Simon has just posted a quote. Sir Ken Robinson is famous for saying, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you never come up with anything original. How can we reshape our assessment practices so that being wrong is as highly regarded as being right?
I'll take that and take it to a different place. If the wrong and right is not all that relevant to the conversation, I think you're in a better space. I wrote a curriculum once for grade 11 computer science. Somebody told me I couldn't do rhizomatic learning in computer science, and I'm like, so I happened to be working at school at the time, at a Department of Education at the time, and I worked with the grade 11 computer science group to rewrite the curriculum for that course. And what we designed was, it was all based on microbits, the little server thingy, little small computer bits. And we were building mini putt courses, was one of the activities we were doing. There was no grade put on whether or not you got the coding right. None at all. The only focus we were doing on, there was 2 things. One of them was your self-reflections about how you felt about the process. And so those were really cool because, like, we'd end up with, it's too noisy in this room, I can't manage. And that got you the grade, because what we're looking to do is have you reflect on how you feel while you're working, thinking that that's the thing that's going to help you improve. And the other thing we graded quite closely was your project management, and thinking that, again, there's a skill set nobody's ever going to be sad to have. And so we graded those 2 pieces and did nothing around the coding. So there was no stakes there at all. You just had to, at some point, it had to work. So we would work with you until you figured it out. And while you're doing that, you're like, oh yeah, I think you're missing how this, how a variable works. So let's talk about that again. So we did all the teaching pieces. I just didn't care whether or not they got it right or wrong. We focused on the creativity. We had a lot of fun, but nobody got graded on how cool their mini putt hole was. Because again, you're more artistically inclined. You've never done anything creative in your life. Nobody's ever allowed you to. I'm not going to grade this person higher because this person comes from a household where creativity is not valued. I'm going to be happy about the little cone that you built and be happy about your gigantic windmill. And either way, all I care about is your ability, I shout back, your ability to do the project management, which again, I think a good skill and one that I'm happy to grade, and then that ability to reflect. And I think certainly rewarding people's risks is good. Creativity in the classroom is also a really huge challenge. Like, it's a real problem, right? It sounds great until you actually have it. And then because real exploration involves a lot of people being cut by scissors. Like, there's a reason why you structure particularly small children in a classroom so they don't hurt each other. So there's a real balance there in terms of creativity that needs to be structured. Sorry, I didn't see the. Oh, see, that math thing makes me crazy. That's what I'm talking. Like, it's just, that's ridiculous. For those of you who are not following along, that chat room comment, I don't want to read it out loud, makes me mad. That's how you lose someone for the rest of their life. That's a really great question. I agree with you. That is certainly a challenge with communities. Having done a lot of community work over the years, so MOOCs, for those of you who are familiar with the term, when we originally did them, the first ones, for me at least, were a practice of doing research through a community. So if you look at, it was an idea sort of like, how do you have 5,000 people work on a question? And so what comes out of that? Who knows what happens, but just watching the way those things intersect and watching things emerge from it was really fascinating. But one of the first things I learned about those communities is they can be nasty. Communities, the first thing a community does, it seems, once it becomes a we, is it identifies a them and it attacks. And so there's all of these sort of weird complexities about community that don't come out of the original Living Wagner work, though they would certainly know, having done a whole bunch of community work, they certainly know that now. But communities are fickle things, right? They're not always good. They're not always coherent. They're hard to maintain. They take a lot of work. If it has an authoritative, stable center, it's probably a group and not a community, to use the Stephen Downes distinction. That sounds like, I mean, those can work too. But if you look at the sort of, it becomes what's the term? A cult of personality, right? Where you have someone who's, I mean, you kind of need a little bit of that if you're starting a community, because people need to know what it is. And it's an awful lot. I mean, you can write a whole bunch of, you can write a treatise on what the values of your community are, but people are going to take it from the people who are starting it. So there's a bit of that cult of personality, which again is not an idyllic. All of us who are involved in a community who start one, like, we all have our flaws and the places where we've made mistakes. So yeah, a really unsettled place. Do you take a strong view about how communities change? No, I take an uncertain view about it, I guess I would say. It's just a question of constantly revisiting your values. You've just got to be committed to going back to your values over and over again. Oh, that was a long answer.
I just typed in, and your view can be subject to change tomorrow, I guess.
That's right. That's right.
But I think before we started the session, I think, John, Dave, and I talked about, uncertainties, what keep you motivated, what keep you going, isn't it? If you know everything, then life's a bit boring, isn't it?
Yeah.
Uncertainty means that you remain, like you were saying, Dave, that being curious about things as to how you develop, right? I think we need to be more curious. Can I just ask you something? It's related to your kind of whole what you stand for, your whole practice, but slightly unrelated to what we've been talking about. It's something that I think John and I are really fascinated over the last few years, particularly since we started this webinar series, is being openly sharing, open educational research, OER, for those of you who don't know what it is. And you are a very active kind of key player in the kind of the OER movement. How did you get involved, and why is that important to you, being open and sharing with the community?
So I, with a colleague of mine, I did a bunch of podcasting and webcasting when I was in South Korea. So we did a whole bunch of sort of conference-y business and whatever else. That colleague of mine, Jeff Lebo, we started a podcast in 2005. And we just started inviting people in so we could learn about the field. And there are hundreds of those out there. And so as we brought people in, we started learning about the field. We started learning about sort of openness. And openness was the first time I came across it was Alec Kouros at the University of Regina, those of you who don't know him. He was writing in his blog about it. And there's something about the ethos of all of us sort of not replicating what we're trying to do over and over and over again that made sense to me at first, where you're like, oh, so if everybody is teaching first year physics, why are we all buying a textbook? Like, why can't we just decide on it? And it's not like the textbooks are fantastic. There seems to make sense there. And also, so that was where I started. But for me, openness has gotten a lot broader than that. So I think of it as partially in the sort of old UK sense of widening participation, sort of that idea of the open door that's not just open in the sense of open source, like you can have access if you know how, but rather open in the sense that I try to do whatever I can to make this a place that you feel welcome in. Also, that word open has become as much about the idea of open pedagogy, like open to the student, where it's less top down, it's less about me knowing what you want to know and more about me trying to help guide you through the crazy abundance that's involved in your field. So it's grown as it's gone along, and it's changed as it goes along. I have my suspicions about OER as a concept. There are certainly some people in OER who do it as a different way of taking control, and so I certainly have been part of that community, but I've also been critical about it at the same time. So, but again, I've earned so much more from giving my stuff away than I ever would have by trying to sell it. So just from a purely selfish perspective, it's been great because I've met so many great people, and my work has gotten so much better by people looking at it and going, "Are you kidding?" And then sort of engaging with them along that way. So it's been hugely valuable to me personally, to my work as well.
I totally agree with that, because part of my current job is kind of trying to engage with our academics on saying, publishing in kind of like academic journals is important, doing reputable research is important, but there are things you can do between writing an article to getting it published, because sometimes it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years, if you're lucky. And I think, being open and sharing, in podcasts is one of my favorite topics. This is my thesis. And also like maintaining a blog and just like, engaging with the community, you can get a lot out of it, both from your kind of knowledge and learning perspective, as much as trying to kind of get a bit kind of make a name for yourself in the community. It's kind of like an easier and a quicker way to kind of get your stuff out there. I totally agree with that. And this is why we're so privileged today to have you here with us. We have a question about AI. What are your thoughts on AI in education now? More specifically, do you have any highly positive or highly negative stories about its use?
And actually it goes down to using AI to help information overload. Kind of. So I was working on this week, which is kind of my thought about how that works. Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying. The problem with AI in education is that it harms the best faculty that I work with. So the ones who created assignments, particularly in large size classes, that allow for students to explore the kinds of learning they're looking for. Do an interview with your grandmother and do a reflection on that interview. That kind of stuff no longer works for 80% of the class because they're just going to run through AI and get it done. So that's been what I call my march of sadness, where I've been walking around to faculty and talking about this AI impact on education, the challenges there. More broadly, I think that AI is really a symptom rather than a like it's a symptom of a longer arc. So we've been living with search for almost 25 years now, and I think search is a thing that's really disrupted education. It's just taken us this long to kind of have it all pulled together because AI is really just really complex search. And we're now accessing information without learning any of the skills that we used to that contextualize the way that we access information. So we skipped all those skills. I'm not saying we can't learn them, but we have no real processes for learning them that are established that people do. I'm sure people out there have them, but we don't use them on a regular basis. So we've disrupted our relationship between the way we find information and the way that we bring it in. I think AI is the sort of place where everybody can now see it. Like it's obvious when you use it. But we're going to have to figure out how we're going to help people keep themselves safe from corporations and from bad actors who are trying to convince them of things and whatever else, because the AI is going to get worse. Oh, what's her name? She was fired from Google for saying that AI was going to be a problem. Oh God, it's bad I forget her name. She was saying that the thing we really need to watch out for is that the texts that AI are drawing from are soon going to be the majority of the text that the models are drawing from are going to be AI text soon enough. And then as that happens more and more, the stuff we're going to be getting is like generated. A worse situation even that's happened with the auto-tuning that's happened in music, where all of this sort of context and all of the sort of flaws and all the uncertainty gets taken away. Not because it's not there anymore, it's just not part of the conversation. Wash that away. And I think, again, just to take one last pot shot at some dominant educational figures, I think that their approach to education and research supports that. I think they're totally fine with it because it just makes it easier for them to measure their magic numbers and have a clarity of objectives that allow us to better measure efficiency in student learning, even though they never bother to explain what that means. Sorry, one random pot shot at the end.
I love the last comment. I'm guessing, I'm just saying out loud from my own personal experience, is that you would welcome anyone who sort of just engage with you on the internet. And where do you hang out these days? Because I kind of feel like Twitter is kind of there, not really there. People just taking So where do you hang out these days? Where do we?
I've mostly moved to LinkedIn, as weird as that sounds. A lot of my colleagues have moved there. A lot of my back channels have moved there. And it is resilient to random people making random shots because people's professional lives are associated with it. So there's something nice about that. I do miss some of the jocularity. I miss some of the informality that Twitter, well, particularly pre-2016 Twitter, because again, like many things, we've been losing those things for a long time. We've been losing Twitter for a long time. Twitter in 2012 was a magical space where the worst thing you had was porn hashtags to deal with. Whereas, people increasingly took on those kinds of polarized perspectives and brought them there. So LinkedIn is probably where I'm the most right now. I'm still on Twitter. I have too many friends that I only have through there, like sort of distant friends that I still care about. And I mean, I've got a Blue Sky account and I've got a Mastodon account and I've got all those other spaces, but I don't spend as much time there.
Just one last question, if I may. What's next? What's your plan for the next? What you're working on? Are you allowed to tell us?
Sure. I'm digging into situational analysis, just to go back to the research business a bit. So I have this piece of research I'm going to try to do through situational analysis. We'll see how that goes. I'm the conference that I posted in, the Shrug Con for the summer, talking about uncertainty is a big thing I'm looking to do. And I'm trying to pull together an uncertainty community at the same time, a group of people to sort of keep thinking about, like, I want to put a foot in the ground for uncertainty to give us a little bit more to step on. Because right now, when you look at the relationship to uncertainty or wicked problems or whatever else in education, there's not a lot of, there's some pieces there, but it's not something people have put a lot of work into, and a lot of them are disconnected. And I'd love to sort of find a place with some folks to contextual to get a first step, so people have something to look at whenever they're interested in sort of getting a place to start. So I'd love to get that out of 2024.